Release That Witch. Audiobook, Part 2.
Chapter 15, Misconceptions. After seeing the knight leave with his orders, Roland returned to the table. If you can heal small animals, why would you still think that witches are evil? The teacher said that witches can do things ordinary people can't. Sometimes it does not look bad, but this is the devil's ruse in order to lure more people. The girl's voice lowered. I've never seen the devil, I swear. Of course you haven't. That is just one of the church's lies, and your teacher was deceived as well, Roland comforted. The church lies? Nana exclaimed, why? Roland shook his head and did not explain. Even if he tried to explain, they would still not understand. When civilization had not yet developed to a certain extent, these sort of strange things would always happen. Even without personal gain, people would automatically attribute man-made, natural disasters or any unexplainable phenomenon to the invented culprit behind the scenes. Historically speaking, the blame always fell on the women. And in this world, if witches possessed powers of unknown origin, it was even easier to become the target of the church. The church could allow for the witches to be ordained as saints by saying they were the gifts of God, or the witches could be hunted, proclaiming they were the demon's advocates. However, once the former was chosen, monotheism would greatly lose its power, because the appearance of the witches had nothing to do with the church. If churches that believe in other deities also recognized the witches as saints, and everyone was the chosen one, which church's God was the true God? The prerequisite for the coexistence of polytheism was that the gods were real and could restrict each other. Since gods did not exist and were only hearsay icons, why should the other party share the world? So any faith would claim that they believed in the true God, and the infidels would have to be eliminated. So they could only choose the latter, to spare no effort in destroying the witches. This was irrelevant to preference, it was all about gain. There was a living chicken in the castle's kitchen. It was still kicking and fluttering when the knight carried it by its wings. The next thing left Nana stunned. Roland pulled out the silver knife and stabbed the chicken once. The knight held it in place firmly, and he let Nana treat it before he tried a different method and continued. He did this repeatedly. When the chicken finally died, Roland had a better understanding of Nana's ability. She could restore the damaged parts, including splits, fractures and bruises. But if the body part was completely missing, for example, after the chicken feet were cut off, she could not regenerate claws. But the broken claws could be connected if she used her ability to make the fracture intact. Finally, she could not reverse life and death. Once the chicken died, her treatment became useless. Throughout the whole treatment, Roland did not see the sticky water that she described. She simply put her hand on the chicken's wound, and then it was healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After several experiments, Nana did not deplete much energy, at least she did not sweat profusely like Anna. Only Nana was dissatisfied, as she felt it was too much to treat the chicken like this, so she kept staring at Roland even after the experiments. Come on, stop staring and eat something. Roland had to resort to summon afternoon tea so as to divert her attention. This move had worked several times on Anna, so he assumed that many girls her age could not resist the temptation of delicious dessert. And truth be told, Nana did not fare any better than the one before her. After eating the pastries, Roland sent Nana away. Anna asked in confusion, why didn't you make her stay? She's like me, we're both witches, right? She still has family members, and they have not realized she is a witch. Anna whispered, it's just a matter of time. Yes, sooner or later, Roland sighed. So anyway, the later the better. Do you miss your father? She shook her head, and her eyes were like a calm lake with no ripples. It seemed that the betrayal by her father had left her completely disappointed. But even without any relatives, she still had friends. Nana will come often, in fact, I intend to let her come every 2 days to train her ability. Hearing this, she blinked her eyes and nodded quickly. Do you want to go back to Carl's college with her and learn from the other kids? Anna did not answer, but he felt he heard her thoughts. this situation won't last too long. As long as I'm here, you'll eventually live like ordinary people and not be hunted wherever you are or sent to the gallows. This day will come, I promise, said Roland firmly. Since Karl van Bate took over the project, Prince Roland immediately became idle. He stayed in the castle garden every afternoon, practicing with Anna or Nana. Now Anna's training no longer required additional clothing. Even if each finger was in flames, she could skillfully operate them without lighting up her witch hat by accident. Nana also put on a set of witch uniform. Although she was reluctant to practice, for the sake of afternoon tea, she still poutingly did so. Watching the two witches dangling in the yard, Roland's wicked humor was greatly satisfied. Occasionally he would go to the foot of North Slope Mountain to check on the progress of the project. After more than 2 weeks of construction, about 100 meters of the city wall had been built. In the absence of the theodolite distance measurement, Karl asked the craftsmen to use a piece of wood at the same time every day, according to the shadow of the sun, to determine the distance and flatness. At a distance of every 10 wood markers, a viewing tower was set up to play a role in stabilizing the city wall. Such large-scale employment naturally caught the attention of the town's nobility. However, other than getting some information from Beriv, they made no further movement, as if the situation had nothing to do with them. Roland did not mind this. These people's family businesses were in Longsong Stronghold and would certainly not stay here to help him guard Border Town. He could even imagine the gang of people ridiculing his attempts in private. Not just the nobility, but businessmen were the same. In previous years in Border Town, once animal fur traders realized nothing could be purchased, they also returned to Stronghold. They naturally vented their discontent about returning empty-handed on the ruler Roland. The news about Kingdom of Grey Castle's Prince Roland Wimbledon's construction before the arrival of months of demons was deemed as simply stupid and ignorant. News of this spread along the Redwater River. At this point, no one thought he could protect the town, and in fact, most people simply did not consider this a remote possibility. After all, Prince Roland did not give the impression of being a courageous fighter. Whatever he was contemplating, he would eventually have to obediently retreat to Stronghold. And just like this, amidst discussion by the masses, Roland ushered in the first winter. Chapter 16: The Road Ahead. The fire in the fireplace was burning brightly, chasing away the chill coming in from the door and window gaps. Atop of the fireplace hung a huge horned deer head, and under the shadows, the horns looked like huge claws. Opposite was a dark red long wooden table, filled with parchment rolls and books, mostly executive orders waiting to be signed. Roland usually came here to deal with official matters. After converting the third level of the castle into an office, he gradually started to like it here. Through the French window behind him, he could see the town extending into endless mountains. The mountain passed through the continents of the impassable mountain range, dividing Kingdom of Grey Castle and wild places into east and west. And North Slope Mountain was just a branch of the impassable mountain range. At the foot, you could see the garden surrounded by the wooden fence. The wooden shed built for Anna's training had been removed, and the brick pool was made into a long table for afternoon tea. When the weather was good, he would also go downstairs for a suntan, or lie on a specially tailored rocking chair to take a nap. Although the castle was not big, at least it was still considered a villa with an independent garden. In his previous life, it would have been almost impossible to own a real stone castle. He would have had to pay for tickets just to have a visit. But now, he not only owned the castle, but also the town. Your Highness, recently you've had a lot of expenses from recruiting the craftsmen and the manual laborers. If we continue such expense, we won't be able to last until next spring. Beriv held a pile of parchment while reporting the recent financial situation to Roland. The original income and expenditure of Border Town was very simple. One line was ore in the precious stones trade. This line was monopolized by Longsong Stronghold, turning North Slope Mine's output into wheat or bread, with no tax in the middle, and Stronghold sent people to host the exchange of resources. As the saying goes, those nobles stationed in border town can be seen as regulators of the shareholders, and their fiefs are mostly in the east of Stronghold, where they are only temporary and different people are dispatched each year. In fact, the history of border town was less than 3 decades long. Compared to nearly 200 years of Longsong Stronghold, it was a mere newborn baby. Originally Duke of Ryan was just going to build an outpost here as an early warning for the invasion of demonic beasts, but he did not expect to discover a wealth of mineral resources at North Slope Mountain after land reclamation. So he decided to set up the town here, and named it Border Town. In a sense, it was North Slope Mine that created the town. In order to prevent theft and cover-ups, the Duke did not employ the noblemen, but instead employed local residents, refugees, and even criminals to serve as miners. The output of ore was evenly distributed according to the resources allocated by the investors. Longsong Stronghold only needed to provide the employers with a full year of grain and a small commission, which was a fixed amount regardless of the output of the mine. Border Town had more than 2,000 residents and half of them worked for the mining area. The rest was the other industries in the town, such as blacksmith shops, pubs, textiles, and so on. The meager tax of Border Town came mainly from here, and not much was left at year's end. The previous lord did not take this barren land seriously. After Roland was sent by Kingdom of Grey Castle, he simply stayed in Longsong Stronghold and did not come back. Therefore, Roland could only pay people to repair the wall with his own money. If it was the previous Prince Roland, this would have been out of the question. But for Roland, as long as he could stabilize Border Town, he would not mind investing his whole property. Anyway, in the future, ore trade would no longer be bartered with food. If it used currency, then his investment would be just a small price to pay. The only problem was Longsong Stronghold was not willing to give up the monopoly, and continued normal trade with Border Town. This was quite like snatching food from the tiger's jaws, but Barov's data showed inefficient manpower and transport hurdles. The annual value output of the ore was no more than 1,000 pieces of gold royals. Compared to the entire revenue of Longsong Stronghold, it was but a drop in the ocean. The only loss was that of the nobles. For the long-term development of Border Town, this line had to be recovered. Roland knew very well that even if their investment was fully recovered 10 years ago, the nobles would not easily let go. Even if this was a small piece of meat, yet this was a passive income without doing anything. He was willing to give the previous investors a certain amount of concessions and compensation, such as half-price purchase and the like. But dragging a ship of ore back in exchange for just half a boat of food was not allowed to happen again. As Roland stared at the list, Barov was also watching him intently. Over these 3 months, well to be exact in the last month, Prince Roland underwent some unspeakable changes. Outsiders might not notice, but he was with the prince every day, and the change could not escape his eyes. At the Kingdom of Grey Castle, he had already heard of Prince Roland Wimbledon's notoriety. He did what he liked, wantonly and without caring about noble manners. In short, he did not make grave mistakes, but he made numerous errors and was far worse than his 2 brothers. When Barov was sent by His Majesty to come here, he was very disappointed. If not for the fact His Majesty promised to appoint him as the official treasurer after the struggles of the throne ended, he would have given up ages ago. In the first 2 months at Border Town, Prince Roland showed his usual extreme childish behavior and offended almost all the local nobles. Fortunately, the town was very small. Even if all the administrative staff vacated, he could easily fill their posts with the dozen civilian staff he brought. And then, things started to change. When did the change begin? He thought, probably, after he saved the witch. Barov had considered that Roland was possessed by the demon, or maybe he was controlled by another witch. But this was a slim possibility. If demons and witches had such ability, would they look for Prince Roland? Wouldn't it make more sense to control His Majesty or the Pope? What further dispelled his suspicions was the fact that he saw the prince hold God's locket of retribution. This was the church's weapon to deal with witches. Any demon would collapse in front of the God's locket of retribution. Yet Roland held it directly. In other words, if he was not Prince Roland but a devil that did not even fear the divine power, then would it be necessary to expose him? Saving one's life was the most important thing. The prince continued with his notorious behavior, but he left a different impression on Barav. No, Barav thought, the two had clearly opposing behaviors. The biggest difference was in motive. He could feel Roland was planning something. In order to achieve his purpose, he had to use some inexplicable means. Just like how Roland tried to persuade himself to save a witch, the plan may not be mature and have loopholes, but the prince was indeed moving forward with his plan, and was confident about the results. This was the most puzzling thing. The throne could be taken by any one of Roland's siblings, but definitely not the prince himself. He would have been clear about this fact. Talking about development in this small place, border town? Even the gods could not do it. What crazy plan was Roland making, trying to develop a border town to be more successful than Valencia? Even convincing himself that it would work? If it was just a crazy fantasy, that would be fine, but Roland's construction of the walls proved otherwise. He really intended to be stationed here, relying on a type of alchemy product, cement, to build a wall that was impossible to complete. Barav's family had an alchemist, but he had never heard of alchemists creating such a thing. To build a wall based on what had never been seen, was this self-confidence or imagination? What else was Prince Roland concealing? He found himself starting to have a faint interest in the future. Chapter 17, The Ambassador, Part 1. "This place is just as lousy as it used to be," said Petrov, the ambassador from the stronghold, as he stepped out of the cabin and was immediately hit by the stench of rotten wood. Sinking in the moist and dull atmosphere that discomforted him from head to feet, he sniffed and looked up to the sky where the clouds were gathering. They were a sign of heavy rain that drew near. "It's been a year since your last visit," said the assistant as he wrapped his boss in a wool coat. "There is nothing here except stones." "It's been 1.5 years, stated Petrov. "Every season the Lord Duke sends a different person here, and the last time I came here was in summer. Apart from stones, there were other kinds of things here like fine furs and—" "What?" the assistant said with a dazed look. Petrov shook his head and said no more. When he crossed the board and set foot on the moss-covered wooden dock, the planks he stepped on were creaking so loudly that it made him believe it would only be a few years before the whole dock shattered into pieces. Yes, in addition to stone and fur, it was the land of border town that could not be underestimated. But a common assistant who only dealt with papers and numbers was not open-minded enough to understand. The land between border town and Longsong stronghold was untouched and squeezed into a narrow channel, caged on each side by the impassable mountain range and the Redwater River. If it was border town that worked as an outpost and took the duty as a defensive line, the stronghold would easily possess the untouched land, and farm it constantly. And with the natural barrier guarding it on both sides, managing it would be simple. The food harvested from the land would feed the rising population in the stronghold, and border town would become part of the stronghold rather than staying independent. The only disadvantage was that the operation would be expensive and would take 3 to 5 years. What a shame, when it came to investment, most nobles were no better than a poor businessman. "Why is there no ore in the storage yard?" Pointing toward the clearing, the assistant said, "Shouldn't they stack the ore before we arrive?" Petrov sighed softly. "We should pay our respects to His Highness." "Wait. Mr. Ambassador, why not wait for their welcome party?" the assistant suggested. Petrov was unsure if there would even be one, so instead he stated, "Let's go, the stables are just in front of us." This illustrated the difficulties with having the two lands independent. When the king sent out Prince Roland in the name of the royal decree on the selection of the crown prince, how would a loyal young man behave? Surely he would sweep everything under his wings, and as such, it was hardly possible that he would trade ores and gemstones for food and bread. He feared that gold royals would be all that the prince held dear. He would do the same under such circumstance because no one would tolerate when all that they've reaped from the land was exchanged at such a low price. It seems that many people have forgotten that Longsong Stronghold is not merely a station run through Redwater River. Beyond it also exist many other places, like Willow Town, Fallen Dragon Ridge, and Redwater City, where he could sell minerals at market price, and he could take the refugees. They were only a little further than Longsong Stronghold. And then what would Longsong Stronghold do? Bar the river and block the prince's procession? No, to do so would be treason. Even if it was a well-known fact that Prince Roland did not earn much favor from his father, the loyal name and blood could not be ignored. There were no better horses in the stable other than the old ones. They were weak and skinny with scruffy fur that left them trembling all over as they trotted slowly. The ambassador had no choice but to pay 2 gold royals as a pledge for 2 shabby horses, which carried them slowly on the flagstones along the river. "Look! Sir, is that a cargo boat from Willow Town?" The assistant called out, causing him to turn his eyes to where his assistant was pointing. Slowly, there came a sailing boat with 1 mast and a banner bearing a green leaf and scimitar hanging over it. Its high waterline meant that the boat was full of cargo. Nodding his head and keeping a poker face, Petrov hid the very real concern that was triggered by what he had seen. He had not expected Prince Roland to act so early. If Prince Roland has begun to trade with the towns downstream of the Redwater River, then the advantage he has is shifting. He had intended to persuade his father to agree on acquiring ore at 30% less than the market price. And at any rate, there are gemstones that will be crafted into many valuable luxuries. However, this issue is under a monopoly, and is not for him to decide. Even the Honeysuckle family as a whole cannot make a decision unless all 6 noble families agree. But they seemed unaware of what had been changed as time had gone by, and barely had any response. Or maybe the production in the mine was too low to draw their attention. It ended up that the other 5 families remained indifferent, and his own father, looking so sure of himself, rejected his advice. But all of them had made a huge mistake, since the low production of the mine, caused by the trade-off based on materials and food, could easily be transformed into a much greater amount when the exchange became normal and the ore was bought at a fair price. With this, the more border towns sold, the more money they would earn, resulting in an increase in ore the following year. But with this, Petrov thought the monopoly on ore that he had hoped for would be unlikely to realize. From the view of the empty storage yard on the dock, it seemed that the prince had no plan of trading his stones for inferior wheat, as he had already summoned other buyers. 30% off would be his last bargaining chip if he still wanted to maintain business with Border Town. Willow Town would offer as much as half off the market price, since the long waterway between the 2 towns would add transportation costs, and they also had more than one source of minerals. The prices offered by Fallen Dragon Ridge and Redwater City would be even lower. As a result, Prince Roland may continue his business with the stronghold, especially for gemstones. But the problem was whether his father would agree on the contract that he decided to sign. What if the other families thought that the contract was a sign of surrender and handing over family interests? After all, they always treated Border Town as a sub-area of the stronghold and a supplier for whatever they needed. They rode slowly to the gate of the castle that was standing in the southeast corner of the town, whose lord had changed since his last visit. The guards saw the ambassador's voucher and immediately went to inform the lord. Prince Roland then quickly sent for Petrov. When both of them arrived at the hall, the prince was seated and waiting. "Mr. Ambassador, please take a seat." Roland clapped his hands, and the maids brought forward a scrumptious-looking meal. It included an entire roast chicken, boar trotter stewed with mushrooms, buttered bread, and a huge portion of vegetable soup. It looked like, whether in the border or not, whatever a prince wanted, he got it. Petrov naturally could not hold back. It took 2 days from the stronghold to Border Town with good winds. If he traveled on a freighter with multiple masts, then it would move even slower and take 3 to 5 days. There was no kitchen on the boat, and they would usually eat their own dried meat or wheat cake. Seeing the hot churning dishes, his mouth and throat filled with saliva. But the courtesy that he had been trained since his youth helped him keep his decent manners at the table. In comparison, the prince paid little attention to his own manners, especially with using a knife and fork. Petrov noticed that he used a pair of little sticks to pick up the food, and only used the knife and fork to cut the meat. The little sticks looked handier than a fork. "What do you think?" Roland suddenly asked when the dinner was about to end. "Of what?" The ambassador was lost. "These." The prince shook the sticks in his hand and went on without waiting for Petrov's reply. "A knife and fork seem beyond most commoners' means, not to mention they are made from silver. However, a man who grabs food with his bare hands could easily take in much filth and become ill. Do you follow?" The ambassador did not know what to say as he barely understood the question. Maybe, he guessed, that the filth attached to the food that we eat could make us vulnerable to sickness. But how could that be true? People have eaten with their hands for a long time, and no one has died from such a thing. There are numerous pairs of oak sticks in misty forest, and they are both clean and accessible. This means that the common people should use them to grab the food, instead of using their hands. Prince Roland sipped some of his drink and said, "Of course, for now, meat seems a little far from their real life, but things will change." Petrov was relieved, as this was not a hard topic for him. He routinely expressed his approval and blessing, but in his heart he disapproved. Let the common subjects eat meat? It was simply whimsical. Even in Grey Castle they are far from this point, not to mention in border town of this desolate land. Chapter 18, The Ambassador, Part 2. Petrov tossed aside his complaints and enjoyed the feast. Under the harmonious atmosphere during the dinner, Prince Roland did not talk about the ore, so Petrov thought it was inconvenient to speak anymore. When the prince told the maid to serve the dessert, Petrov tentatively said, "Your Highness, according to the previous practice, today should be the day when the ores are delivered. However, I didn't see any on the dockyard." Roland put down the sticks in his hand and nodded. "Unfortunately, the Northern Slope mine collapsed a few days ago. My people have been trying to resume production this month. However, the gravel from the collapse has not yet been cleared up. If we go by the schedule, we can't start mining until the start of next year." A collapse? Petrov was stunned for a moment. Was it an excuse? But he soon realized that it was unnecessary for Roland to deceive him. Otherwise, it would be clear if he went to Northern Slope, and it would show on his face if the prince told such an obvious lie. Then, what about the ore from the past 2 months? Not many are left. According to the normal practice, there aren't enough to support the livelihood of my subjects. Roland emphasized the words according to the normal practice. He continued, "Mr. Ambassador, you remember the months of demons 2 years ago, don't you?" Of course Petrov remembered that. The cold lasted 4 months and nearly 1/5 of the people in border towns starved to death due to the greed of Municipal Administrative Governor Reynolds. There was also opposition brewing among the nobles. Some even demanded Reynolds to be penalized. But this incident finally resulted in 0 consequences for him, simply for the fact that he was the husband of the Duke's second daughter. Now that the prince brought up this issue, Petrov had a bad feeling. "It's worse," said Roland with a sigh. "I'm afraid we only have enough for 2 months if we trade wheat the way we used to. My people can't survive winter with so little food. The ways of the past must be abolished." Petrov opened his mouth, but did not know how to refute the prince's words. He wasn't a professional diplomat, and hearing such good reason, he had no choice but to pause. "Your Highness, I'm sorry about this. The tragedy will never happen. I'll persuade the 6 big families to lend you food for a month. Your people can return them next year when the production is resumed. If I sold the ore to Willow Town, I won't need to repay the food so slowly." "But..." "There's no but dot," Roland interrupted. "They're willing to buy ore with gold royals and sell their wheat, cheese, bread, and honey at market prices. They can sell anything that can be bought with gold royals. Not to mention, Mr. Ambassador, even if you're willing to lend us 1 month's worth of food, would the other 5 families agree with your decision? As far as I know, it's not easy to reach an agreement with Duke Ryan." Petrov fell into silence. Prince Roland was right. He was not confident in persuading his father, least of all the other 5 big families. To maintain their monopoly, they must change the trading scheme. But he simply had no right to give the final word. He held the title of an ambassador, but he was nothing more than a mouthpiece in reality. Perhaps the Duke did not want anyone to make private agreements with Border Town. The current agreement withstood, whether it was with the former lord or with Prince Roland. That was why the Duke assigned different candidates every season, and they were never the ones in charge of their families. Regardless of the outcome, he had to give it a try. With such resolution, Petrov showed the last of his cards. 30%. He stretched out 3 fingers. The stronghold will buy the ore and gemstones at a price 30% lower than the market price. I think our offer should be higher than that of Willow Town, Your Highness. Roland threw up his hands and said, the old question remains. Can you make that decision for the 6 families? I'll go back to Longsong Stronghold tomorrow. I'll come up with a new contract after reaching an agreement. But my people can't wait that long. You should know that it often takes forever for nobles to reach an agreement. Your Highness, working with Longsong Stronghold is the better choice for you and your people. Willow Town is too far away, and even though you could go there during the months of demons, Petrov said and felt his throat became dry, the journey is dangerous. Good God! What am I doing? His heart was pounding. Am I threatening a prince? Ha ha. Roland unexpectedly did not fly into a rage, but laughed instead. Mr. Ambassador, you seem to have made some mistakes. I haven't thought of going to Willow Town. You mean? Of course, I don't intend to go to Longsong Stronghold either. Roland looked at the ambassador with interest. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, Petrov suspected that he misheard the prince. Fortunately, the prince broke the silence and explained himself. I'm staying in Border Town this winter. Border Town will become the new border of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Don't be surprised, my friend, this is not me saying nonsense. I'll take you to the new wall at the foot of North Slope Mountain for a visit. City wall? Yes, the city wall is a stone wall of about 4 meters high and 2 meters wide, connecting Northern Slope and the Redwater River. With the wall, we can fight off the demonic beasts in Border Town. Petrov felt his brain was not working. The former ambassador had not mentioned any city wall. Back then, the Lord of Border Town was from Longsong Stronghold. How could he send the limited manpower he had to build the wall? In other words, did Prince Roland begin building the walls as soon as he arrived? Even so, it had been only 3 months. How could they have built something like that in such a short time? Wait a minute. What did His Highness say? Is it about 4 meters high and 2 meters wide, connecting Northern Slope and the Redwater River? Petrov calculated in his mind. It would take years to build such a wall. Firstly, he did not have enough masons to cut and grind the stones. Border Town was not like Grey Castle, and most people who lived here were poor laborers. He had yet to digest the news when Roland's next words shocked him again. As for the sales of the ore, I can slash the price by half from next year, my good sir. But I won't sell all of them to Longsong Stronghold, for you won't need so much ore. I think, compared to the low profits the ores make, you'll prefer metal products like spades, shovels, and things like those. He paused for a moment, seeming to wait for Petrov to absorb his words. As for the raw gemstones, they'll be sold to the highest bidder through an auction. I'd like to sell them at a good price after the gem is cut, but unfortunately no one in Border Town has that ability. Do you even have the ability to build a city wall in a few months? Petrov screamed from the bottom of his heart. And what did he meant by saying the stronghold not needing so many ores? Besides, it already took a whole year for them to produce 1,000 gold royals. Even if there will be an increase in the production, it'll be doubled at best. Was he saying that the stronghold can't even take an ore's worth of 2,000 gold royals? That was too presumptuous of him. He tried hard to suppress his frustration and maintained the last of his etiquette. Your Highness, I've memorized everything you said. I'll return immediately and negotiate with the 6 families. But there's one last thing. The city wall you speak of. I want to go and have a look. Of course. Roland smiled. You don't need to be in such a rush. Enjoy the pastries of King's City first. It's not too late to go then, right? Mr. Ambassador? Chapter 19, The Lecture. The winter's first rainfall finally arrived, lasting for 2 days. Roland leaned against his working desk and looked out at the hazy town and rain through the window. The wind brought a shower of rain against the window, causing bursts of ripples. The town's silhouetted outline became distorted through the ripples. The houses and the extensions of the streets seemed bent and deformed, in contrast with their tidy look in the past. Due to the lack of effective drainage measures, the crisscrossed flagstone pavement became overflowing with accumulated water. From afar, the water on the road looked like many little crystalline brooks. The distant mountains and forests were covered with mist, looming and changing like a lost world on Earth. If in modern times, such a landscape would certainly be a tourist attraction, but what Roland wished to see was a jungle made of concrete and steel. Because of the rain, the city wall construction also had to stop. This fact affected his mood and made his previous delight in successfully discouraging the stronghold messenger the day before yesterday fade away. You just said the air around us is made up of lots of different gases, is that true? Anna's clear voice interrupted Roland's thoughts, while she looked at him curiously, blinking her beautiful blue eyes. Ahem, Miss Anna, you should address His Highness with honorifics, warned the chief knight next to her. Don't make a fuss about it. Roland turned around. She's now my student. Since it was raining and they had not much business, he called Carter and the 2 witches to attend his class. Yes, he had decided to give a small lecture on natural science. He was inspired by stonemason Carl's college. If a mason could open a school, then a mechanical engineer like himself could open one too. Why did discrimination exist? Was not it because of ignorance? During any period of history, universal education was the most effective way to promote the development of civilization. He originally wanted the assistant minister to attend the class too, but the latter was too busy with other administrative tasks and politely declined his offer. Roland did not know why, but since the beginning of the winter, Barov seemed to be overzealous and took charge of all the daily management of Border Town all alone. At the prospect of gaining new knowledge, Anna's eyes immediately sparkled with curiosity. Nana also became happy, for she did not need to treat any wounded animals. As for Carter, since he had nothing special to do, he attended the class to see what new nonsense the prince had thought of. But not long after the class had begun, the knight's eyes became drowsy. Nana also had a bewildered look, her eyes staring at the words natural science. It seemed that Anna had only grasped the general idea, trying hard to remember everything she had heard. Roland could not help but stop the lecture for a moment, letting the 3 of them contemplate on his lecture. As for Anna's question, he smiled and nodded. Of course, even though they look alike. Your Highness, I don't understand, since they all look the same, how can you tell that they're different gases? Carter expressed his doubts. I can prove it to you. Roland knew that using only words, most of the people would be confounded by listening to these theories. He decided to make them interested by showing them the example of a simple experiment. A candle, a glass, a wooden basin, a bowl of clear lime water, he had prepared these things in advance. Although at this time they only had pale brown glass, which was far less transparent than normal glass, it could still serve the purpose of the experiment. After all, there was no need to observe the modification process during this simple experiment. Roland had done the experiment beforehand, and the results showed that although magic existed in this world, the rules of nature were still the same as on Earth. He let Anna light the candle and put it in the basin. The process of burning requires a specific gas. This gas is also related to all life. If we stop breathing it, we'll be like this candle. Take a look. Roland put the glass on the candle, and after the flame shook a few times, it soon went out. It exhausted the air. Your Highness, this is not surprising, the chief knight said disapprovingly. Of course we'll die without air, for example, if we fall into the water. Nana nodded repeatedly. So, Do you think that there's nothing in the glass anymore? Roland asked and then poured the lime water into the basin. The waterline rose quickly and stopped rising when half of the glass was filled. This was a classic experiment, often used by most elementary school teachers to arouse children's interest in natural science. Until today, Roland still remembered the shock he felt when his teacher had demonstrated it. It was at that moment that he embarked on the road of science and engineering without looking back. He gently lifted a corner of the glass, and instantly bubbles of air could be seen rising out of the lime water. Then, the clear lime water appeared to be a little bit cloudy, and some white particles slowly spread within the glass. If there was nothing in the glass, we wouldn't see any bubbles or changes on the water surface. This proves that the air contains at least two different kinds of gases. In reality, burning a candle consumes only a part of the air, while the other part doesn't take part in the burning process. Though they are both colorless and odorless, their nature is the complete opposite. Well, that seems to be the case. Carter thought for a long time before figuring out the relationship between the two. But what's the use for knowing this? If we can obtain the former gas, then we can let the flame burn longer, and if we obtain the other gas, we can quickly extinguish the flame. Anna suddenly said. What a genius! Roland praised her silently. Even though she made a small error, she had shown herself to be a genius by suggesting separation and purification of gases before use. She had not received any systematic modern education, but yet she could quickly think of this point. This showed that her logical skills were far beyond those of normal people, at least far better than those of his chief knight. Correct, since the time humans learned to use fire, they were separated from the animals. Perhaps it all started as a coincidence, a lightning that hit a tree and lit it up, or a spark generated between two rocks. But if no one had noticed it and tried using it, we would still be the same as animals, Roland replied patiently. The goal of this experiment is to show you that curiosity and thinking are the driving forces for human progress. There are many similar forces hidden in nature, waiting for us to discover and use them. After he finished, Carter still had a doubtful look while Nana was staring at Roland with open eyes, amazed but unable to comprehend what he meant. Only Anna gazed down as if she was thinking about something. Well, Roland sighed that, indeed, teaching advanced theories would not bring enlightenment, and it would only make people confused. Their intellectual level determined that they would not be able to understand the significance of these forces unless they saw it with their own eyes. Only then they would understand how amazing the hidden forces in nature were. At this moment, the kettle hanging from the mantel gave off a clanging sound, the sound of the steam hitting against the lid. Ah, the water is boiled. The knight walked over to remove the kettle with a fork, and soon the sound stopped. He wrapped a piece of cloth around the handle, and then filled everyone's cups with water. Take this for example. Roland reached out for the cup and felt the temperature of the handle. From the discovery of fire, the principle of boiling water became a reality. Numerous people had witnessed boiling water and used it, but no one thought that the gently curling and rising water vapor could also contain such a tremendous amount of energy. In a few hundred years, it would become the driving force behind humankind's development, and it would quickly change the history of mankind. Although the principle was simple, due to limited technology, it would not be the first choice when it came to farming. But this world was different, he thought. There are witches here. Using magic to fight wars was the way of barbarians. Instead, applying magic to create and to replace some of the key technologies to make civilization develop faster was the correct way to use magic. They chatted until the sunset, and after having dinner together, Roland went to his bedroom. There was no nightlife in that era, and most people went to bed early if they did not make love. He had previously considered taking advantage of his position as a prince and calling a maid to do some physical activities. But in the end, he was too embarrassed to do it. Right after he lit the candle in his room, he heard the sound of applause behind him, and then someone spoke. It was a spectacular lecture. I didn't expect Your Highness was actually a learned man. It was the voice of an unknown woman. Roland instantly felt cold sweat on his forehead. If she could and would suddenly appear like this in his room without giving him notice, what else could she be if not an assassin? He immediately ran towards the door, but before he could reach the doorknob, he felt a cold wind blowing next to his ear. When he was back to his senses, he found a silver dagger firmly lobbed into the door, with only a finger's width to his cheek. Chapter 20, Nightingale. Don't be frightened, Your Highness. I don't intend to hurt you. I only wish to talk to you. Damn, what sort of talk is this? Roland swallowed and slowly turned around. Under the threat of a dagger, he could only wait for the other side to speak. In the shadow of candlelight, Roland saw the other person. She was sitting on his bed, her body hidden under a robe, and a hood hiding her face, so he could not see her clearly. Candlelight cast her shadow over a large part of the wall. Who are you? I have no name, my sisters call me Nightingale. She stood up, pulled up her robe, and made a curtsy as properly as any lady. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to you, Your Royal Highness Roland Wimbledon. Gratitude? Roland noticed that the pattern on her robe shimmered peculiarly in candlelight. 3 parallel triangles with the shape of an eye. Where had he seen this before? The pattern on the coin is the insignia of the sacred mountain and the magic eye. It's the emblem of the witch's cooperation. What Barov had told him flashed in his mind. You're a witch. Ha! She let out a string of chuckles. Your Royal Highness is quite knowledgeable. After recognizing the identity of the other party, Roland was silently relieved. It seemed that she was not an assassin sent by his siblings. So, you've come to this distant town for the sake of the witch in the North Slope mine area? Although I have no idea how you received this information, you came much too late. If I had wanted to hang her, she'd be long dead. I'm aware of that. And if you had done it, I'd have no wish to speak to you. Nightingale sat back down on the bed. The Witch Cooperation Association prefers not to intervene in secular affairs, especially with royalty. But I prefer not to listen to them. It may be improper to kill a prince for a witch, but it's still within my power to leave a deep enough impression on you. It was an explicit threat, but Roland regained his composure. She's alive and well. I'm also aware that there's another girl, Nana. She nodded. I visited this place a week ago, but I didn't meet you. I've been watching all that you've been doing, and while I don't understand why it's that you don't have the typical hostility against us witches, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Witches Cooperation Association. You've been here for a week. Roland wiped his forehead. She's seen everything? This had been going on for a week and he did not notice anything. So, tell me. Did you come here to talk, or just to thank me? Isn't it tiring to stand while speaking to me? She said as she lowered her hood. Come here and talk. I'm not ugly. My appearance won't scare your highness. She was more than not ugly. In fact, one could almost say that she was pretty. With her hood now lowered, Nightingale's golden wavy hair fell down like a cascade, dancing under the candlelight. Her nose was long and her eyes sparkled. Unlike Nana and Anna's childish faces, hers showed an air of maturity. Though in the dark one could not fully perceive her face, the delicate and well-proportioned shadows on her face could serve as enough proof of her beauty. Roland slowly walked across the room and sat next to her on the bed. He was doing so not because her beauty made him forget possible dangers, but rather because he simply believed that she was not malicious. You can talk now. Sure enough, you're not afraid of me. The woman sounded happy. I can see now that you're different from those people. They hate us because they're afraid of us, and I can see the fear in their eyes. But as for you... She could not help reaching out her hand to gently stroke Roland's cheek. You're only curious. Roland made an awkward little cough and turned his head. He really wasn't sure what to think about this change in character. Just a moment ago, she was a deadly assassin, but now she was an overbearing master diplomat. Fortunately, the woman quickly suppressed her emotions. I came here to tell you that I'd like to take Anna and Nana with me. No way! Roland said without thinking, his heart pounding. Fearing that his sudden exclamation might annoy Nightingale, he added, "They're well cared for here, and no one can hurt them. Besides, where do you want to take them? This is the safest place. I'll bring them to the Witches' Cooperation Association, and that's their destination." Nightingale was not brought down by the refusal, and kept a calm tone. The members of the community are their companions. There's no discrimination, no persecution. There's no need for them to hide who they are. And where exactly is the Witches' Cooperation Association located? Or is it that you have no fixed location? A month ago, my guards found your camp in Misty Forest, and now the signs show you've been traveling north. What's in the north other than endless mountains? You're right. We're currently hiding in a place in the mountains, where witches can be completely safe from harm. And just how safe is it to live like a savage in the mountains over winter? Will they have clean drinking water? Enough food? A warm dwelling place? And with the months of demons coming, the whole Northwest will be dangerous. What in the world are you thinking? Roland stopped short. What had Bearif said, exactly? Witches travel to Holy Mountain with the intent of finding true tranquility. The Witches' Cooperation Association was launched in order for witches to travel together to Holy Mountain. No way, were they? Are you going to the impassable mountain range to try and find Holy Mountain? I have nothing to say on this subject. Nightingale smiled, but her look told Roland clearly what to think regarding his speculation. That being the case, I can never let them go with you, Roland said. In just 2 months the demonic beasts will prevail outside the domains, and even if you can avoid humans in the mountains, you won't be able to avoid the demonic beasts. Holy Mountain can be found at any time. You should come to Border Town for winter, and stay here until it has passed. It was Nightingale's turn to be stunned. Stay here? You really are a funny man. She thought for a moment, and then shook her head. Your Highness, you aren't afraid of witches, but yet this doesn't mean that everyone else is the same. As soon as we're exposed to the crowd, the church will soon come knocking at the door. As long as the witches can help ease the burden of the months of demons, my people will realize that they're not evil. Before Roland could open his mouth to speak, Nightingale stopped him. Besides this, we have another thing to consider. Anna is about to reach adulthood. Adulthood? Yes. As if seeing through Roland's doubt, Nightingale calmly explained, adulthood is the first hurdle all witches need to cross. Usually the sooner one becomes a witch, the harder it's to cross the hurdle. Your Highness, do you know why we're seen as the embodiment of the devil? Chapter 21, I'm not going anywhere. When Nightingale finished, the room returned to silence, only with the occasional crackle of candle flame. Roland had a serious look on his face, for he finally understood what the witches were. Most of the witches' awakenings occurred during the months of demons, and it was on that day that the gates of hell were opened. Generally, the time when witches reached adulthood was a dividing line. If a girl had not yet awakened by her 18th birthday, then it was unlikely she would become a witch. However, the one who awoke before her 18th birthday would suffer the demonic torture on her awakening day every year thenceforth. It seemed that the pain was hard to understand by normal people. As Nightingale spoke about this part, her voice trembled. According to her personal experience, it was like something was trying to escape from you. Each blood vessel and tendon was in distending pain. In the end, blood would seep through your skin and eyeballs would protrude out. If you could survive, the body would slowly recover after 4 or 5 days of rest, or you would die in this torture miserably. Nightingale had witnessed the deaths of many companions. Their body lost the energy to support the power and turned into a mass of bulging meatball. Blood mixed with viscera burst out of the body's holes, and then the air turned into black mist. Spray after spray would continue until nothing was left but sections of scarred flesh. It was why witches were regarded as the embodiment of demons. Ordinary people were terrified when seeing it, and who would care what caused the death? Plus the church added fuel to the fire, claiming that this was what would happen to demons. Over time, the witches became the spokespeople of evil. No matter how outsiders saw it, this torture was real, and it was for this reason that the lives of witches were generally short. As time went on, it got more and more difficult, and as such, many of the witches chose to end their own life. The demonic torture when a witch hit adulthood at the age of 18 was the most difficult hurdle to pass. In fact, prior to this point, the magic within them was incomplete. It was only after reaching adulthood that their power was stabilized. After the magic had stabilized, it would also see an increase, and new branches of the abilities could even be created. Unfortunately, the process of stabilization was extremely painful. The torture of the magical power was so strong that the ordinary adult could not take it, and many witches would die on that day. Hearing that, Roland was silent for a long time before he whispered, "According to the ancient books, the witches have to find Holy Mountain where they will receive eternal peace and save them from demonic torture. Is that true? No one knows. Holy Mountain only appeared in the legend. However, if we bring them to the Witches Cooperation Association camp, they'll have a better chance to survive. Over there, they would not have to hide themselves and could live freely. The physical suffering will be much less than that of the past." Roland was vexed because Anna and Nana played an important role in his plan, but he could not bear that they would take tremendous risk for the sake of his plan. "Anna is downstairs. I'll call her over, and if she is willing to go, you can take her with you. As for Nana, I won't see her until tomorrow," he said in a weak voice. "Thank you for your understanding. It seems I didn't misjudge you," Nightingale said as she stood up to give her regards. At this time, Anna had not yet slept, and when Roland called her, she was copying something at a desk. Seeing Roland, she looked surprised. When she was asked to go to his chamber, she followed him without saying a word. When she found there was another person in his room, the girl was shocked. Roland took her hand and introduced them briefly, and then the three sat down around a round table. Nightingale repeated what she had said before. "In the camp, there are many people like you, and they'll be your sisters. This seems to be the case, Miss Anna. Although I signed a contract of employment with you, in the event of life-threatening circumstances, I must respect your opinion. If you agree." "I'm not going." Roland was stunned. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not going." Anna quickly interrupted. "I want to stay here." "Anna, I'm not lying to you." Nightingale frowned. "I can feel the soaring magic power in your body is close to maturity. Your day of adulthood will come 2 months into the months of demons. The earlier you come to the camp, the safer you'll be." She paid no attention to Nightingale, but turned her head and looked at Roland. "Your Highness, do you remember when you asked me if I'd like to go back to Carl's college with Nana and learn with the other children?" Roland nodded. "At that time I did not respond. But what you said after? I don't care whether to live like a normal person." Anna's voice was smooth and natural. "I just want to stay with His Royal Highness, nothing more." Roland had thought he had understood Anna's mind, but now he realized that he did not understand it at all. He could not see any emotions in her eyes. It was neither dependency nor love. There was nothing to see, only deep, bottomless tranquility. He remembered the first time they met. Back then her eyes also looked as calm as they were now. The difference was that at this moment her face was full of life, like a blooming flower. Still, she did not fear death, nor did she await it. "The demonic torture won't kill me," said Anna, "and I'll beat it." Nightingale closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "All right, I understand." "So then, will you leave us alone?" asked Roland. "No, I'll stay here," she said, pulling on her hood and standing up. "Regardless, the camp won't move until the end of the months of demons." "Why?" Roland was shocked. Did she actually plan to watch them throughout the whole winter? "I don't think that the chicks who haven't yet seen adulthood will understand its danger. I've hung over the edge of death and witnessed the loss of my companions. When that day comes, I'll help her. If..." Nightingale shrugged. "If she should not survive, I have experience in dealing with the funeral." She went to the door, unsheathed her dagger, and kneeled once again in front of Roland. "Then I shall take my leave," she said, and her body gradually disappeared into the dark. The mist did not even leave the slightest trace. Is this Nightingale's ability? Roland pondered. Her silent voice simply makes her a natural assassin. And from how she threw that dagger, she had obviously had the relevant training. Apart from being a group of the same type of people, did the Witch Cooperation Association also assist her with the training? Or was it that she had possessed the skills from her life prior to joining them? The information available about the group was simply too little, and Roland could find nothing useful in his memories. However, Roland had a feeling that he would meet yet again with the group, as long as he continued searching for witches. "It's late. Go back to bed," Roland said as he patted the girl's head. To his surprise, Anna pushed away his hand, and left without saying a word. As she shut the door, the lights were cut off behind her and she was left wrapped in shadow. She gently leaned against the door, and the calmness left her as her eyes filled with tears. She raised her head with her arms in front of her face, and whispered with a voice that no one could hear. "Fool." Chapter 22, The Declaration. The day after the rain stopped, Border Town became boisterous again. Many villagers gathered in the square, waiting for the speech of Prince Roland amidst heavy discussion. Roland put up the official notice a day before the speech, saying that anyone who came to the square for this speech could get a dish of oatmeal and half a piece of bread. This amounted to a free lunch for the townspeople. Thus, the audience that showed up was much more than those who watched hanging. When it approached noon, Roland mounted the elevation stand. He would be deceiving himself if he said he was not nervous while confronting the sea of people. He mainly dealt with computer monitors before. Even at meetings, he just applauded the speaker from below. Therefore, this was the first time he needed to deal with such a big crowd. But in order to make the townspeople stay in Border Town, he had to do it. There had to be a general mobilization. Roland waved his hands and the people became quiet immediately. This scene had been repeated a lot of times in secret. However, when this formal performance came, his lips still turned dry. "My subjects, good afternoon. This is Roland Wimbledon, the 4th Prince of Kingdom of Grey Castle. I have gathered you here at this moment to declare an important message. The envoy of Longsong Stronghold reached here 4 days ago for ore delivery. One clear fact is that the collapse of the mine of Northern Slope was a terrible accident we came across. Till today, the production there has not recovered completely, and this accident meant there was only 2 months' output last quarter. I explained to the envoy this condition and hoped he would distribute enough food to Border Town and we would make up the ores at the end of winter. However, he refused and accepted no negotiation. He refused to distribute more food just like 2 years ago." The crowds exclaimed, showing that the food shortage 2 years ago left a deep impression on them. "It gets even worse this time. Astrologer of Kingdom of Grey Castle informed me that this year's winter would be much longer than before and months of demons would probably last for over 4 months. That is to say, everyone might face 2 months of food shortage. You lost your companions, brothers or children 2 years ago. What else are you prepared to lose this time? No! Your Highness, save us, please." Someone shouted loudly and more screams came next. "Your Highness, we beg you to help us." Roland was relieved that he hired a few extras for this occasion. He put up his hands trying to suppress the screams of the crowd. "Of course, I won't leave my subjects behind, not even one. You may not know that the value of wheat and bread Stronghold brings every year is not equivalent to the value of ores they take away. Normally, we just need 2 months' ores to get half a year's food. I have sold ores to merchants from Willowtown and the freighter they sent would soon get to Border Town. Besides bread, there is also cheese, mulled wine, dried meat. This is enough for everyone during the entire winter." There was a burst of cheer in the square. "However, that means we end our relationship with Longsong Stronghold and they won't take in any more of our townspeople. We need to pass this winter in Border Town. As most of us can see, there is a substantial city wall being built in the west of Border Town. I want to tell you that you don't need to worry about the threats from demonic beasts. They are not stronger than the beasts from forests. Although huge and strong, they cannot pose threats to the city wall and merely serve as a target. Make your choice, my subjects. You have two choices here. One choice is to hide behind the shack of stronghold and die of hunger. The other one is follow my order and guard border town till the end to protect your relatives and children. I promise you that if you hold up until the end of months of demons, all those who take part in the building of city wall will be rewarded 25 silver royals. And anyone who sacrifices his life, his family will get a compensation of 5 gold royals. Fight for your highness. Following the example of the extras, the audience shouted they would fight to their death. Sensing their high spirits, Roland took the opportunity to distribute lunch. He did not expect all of them to stay in border town. He was confident that if just half of them stayed, he could stop the demonic beasts from invading them. Petrov didn't know how His Highness Prince Roland maligned him. When he delivered the message to the 6 nobilities of Stronghold, they all laughed uproariously. Do you mean to say that the naive prince intends to throw us off? Even daring to repair the city wall before the coming of winter? Should I praise his courage or ridicule his overconfidence? The bravery of your highness is without equal and known to all. However, Prince Roland isn't equipped with this boldness. He is just ignorant. Sure, he doesn't even have any stonecutters. He just piles up those unpolished stones, and add wet mud in between. Be careful they don't all fall down after a certain height. Anyhow, it is a good thing. If he escapes to Longsong Stronghold, he has no choice but to submit to us. If he dies in border town, we can end this farce early. What do you think, Petrov? The Duke suddenly broke his silence. Petrov stared blankly for a while, and he didn't expect the Duke of Longsong would ask for his opinions. I originally planned to carry on the monopoly management. And if the price is 30% cheaper than the market price, it is worthwhile for us. But he swiftly organized his thoughts. His Highness doesn't want Stronghold to specialize in ores management. He would like to sell ores at the price 50% cheaper than market price, which means he plans to increase the output of ores. And once it doubles the output, we could earn more than before. He also intends to produce ironware. It's popular everywhere and easy to resell. However, these are not the key points. What is the key point? If he is able to guard border town, that would be nice for Stronghold. We don't need to spend too much effort on fighting against demonic beasts, which could save us a lot of money. Besides, the wide land between Longsong Stronghold and border town would belong to us. It would be a good choice to cultivate or migrate, which can relieve the condition of population congestion. Stronghold demonstrated his thoughts one by one. Besides, Prince Roland won't stay in border town forever. Royal decree on the selection of crown prince just lasts for 5 years. We are going to obtain a more prosperous border town. Longsong Stronghold will be the 3rd largest domain of kingdom with the joining of border town. Thus, my advice is. He peeked at Duke, cautiously saying, Stronghold needs to send hands to repair the city wall and coordinate to guard border town. Well done, Duke smiled, but that's just from a business aspect, analyzing the benefits. He then straightened up, glancing at all the other participants, and his tone became gloomy. I have come so far today, and it is not all about benefits. Why should I deal with a person who is out of my control? You need to obey the rules or you will get punished. It is not that important whether border town is prosperous or not. The point is, that is my territory, and no one can interfere, including the prince. Chapter 23, The Source of Power. Come and try to put the 2 pieces together, said Roland. Anna stretched out her fingers and pressed on the seams of the iron plate. The flame sprayed from her fingers, and the interface melted at a visible speed. Reduce the firepower and start from the back again. She nodded and did as she was told. The 2 iron plates were joined at 90 degrees and firmly welded together. Roland scrutinized the interface, and the effect was as he imagined, a perfect weld without any flaws. If the traces of grinding could be polished away when the iron was molten, the two iron plates would look no different from a single body. Very good, Miss Anna, that was fantastic. Roland could not help but praise. Next, we'll also attach the other two pieces of iron. What's this? An iron bucket? No, it's a cylinder. He corrected. Cylinder? Anna repeated confusedly. Yes, it can be used to fill the air. Roland pointed to another square iron plate. See the hole above? Air flows from this hole into the cylinder, activating the piston. The piston is an iron plate smaller than a cylinder's diameter, and it can move freely in the cylinder. Even Anna began to feel dizzy in the face of so many foreign words. Then these. Cylinder and piston, what do? They are used to create a machine that can move automatically. The steam engine, the driving force of mankind's first industrial revolution, completely liberated human and animal power. Its schematic diagram was familiar to every mechanical engineer. In short, it was a magnified version of the kettle. The boiled steam was introduced into the cylinder, pushing the piston and connecting rods, converting heat into mechanical energy. The principle was very simple, but that did not mean it was easy to manufacture. Its difficulty lay in the airtightness between the cylinder and the piston, as well as the manufacture of the gas pipe. If the metal processing was not advanced enough, relying on manual forging to create a qualified cylinder would be simply impossible. However, Anna's ability made up for the deficiency in technology. Roland just needed to design 4 same-sized pieces of iron plate in advance, let the blacksmith polish the cast, and then use the right-angled plate to fix the shape. Followed by Anna's welding, Roland could get a very stiff square cylinder. With the help of the witch, he did not need to follow the traditional production process, which firstly to make a gun barrel machine, and then to process a circular cylinder. It was the same with the other large parts. You could make small pieces and then join them. In this way, even the blacksmith shops could work together to create a steam engine with all the necessary components. In fact, before welding was invented, people could only rely on bolts or rivets to connect small pieces. The internal of the cylinder had to be smooth, and the conventional connection obviously could not do this. The only trouble was the gas pipe. Its production method was not really anything special. A long iron plate was welded until it became red hot, and was placed into the groove-type mold, and then was knocked into shape with a hammer. This was also the method of producing flintlock barrels. But the barrel also needed to be straightened afterwards, including drilling and rifling, hence it was a little more complex. The trouble was that Roland could not call the blacksmith to his castle backyard, as the witch could not be exposed yet. Besides, he was not good at forging iron. In desperation, he had to let Chief Knight do it instead. So after 3 tedious days, Roland finally created the first steam engine in the backyard. So this is your great invention? Carter frowned at the strange machine. He also ascertained it had nothing to do with the cult. The machine seemed more like a sealed stove, each of whose iron lumps was manually installed by him. It would be strange if the demon had any interest in it. But how could a pile of iron lumps move? It looked very clumsy, and had no feet. How could it fly? But in Roland's eyes, this seemingly simple machine exuded the beauty of industrial charm. With the scientific knowledge he acquired in the previous life, he naturally would not make the Newcomen steam engine, the Watt steam engine, or the steam engine. His first trial product was a high-pressure steam engine with double connecting rods and sliding valves. Its manufacturing process was not more difficult than that of the most primitive steam engine, but the key lay in some innovative ideas. You'll find out soon. Roland poured a bucket of water into the steam compartment and let Anna light some firewood. 10 minutes later, the water boiled, and kept boiling furiously. Soon, a crackling sound came from the cylinder, and Roland knew that was the sound of thermal expansion in the cylinder. The piston's iron plate was thin, the expansion was larger than the cylinder block, and would ultimately be edged firmly in the cylinder wall. Isn't this boiling water? Didn't expect it to be a stove, Carter muttered. When the cylinder was full of steam, what happened next made Roland very excited. The piston began to push the connecting rod outwards. When the rod moved to the vertex, the other connecting rod pulled the sliding valve, causing the steam in turn to push the piston inward. The two connecting rods worked alternately to make the wheel rotate, and with the increased firepower, it quickly reached its peak. The machine let out a harsh roar, and the exhaust spat out white gas, with a kind of unstoppable momentum. "This is what you mean by the hidden power of nature?" Anna asked blankly. The chief knight looked incredulous. He installed the big iron wheel with a huge effort. Yet now it was like a feather spinning, and he could even feel the air blowing caused by the spinning wheels. This could only mean this machine of iron lumps had a surprising strength. His heart gradually became a little uneasy. His Highness said that it could replace manpower and animal power. If this was not a lie, when it replaced the horse and the chariots, even 10 knights would not be able to resist this brute force. It took 15 years to train a qualified knight, but to make such an iron furnace, it only took 3 days. If the time of building certain parts by blacksmith was counted, it would only take a week in total. It did not need food, was not afraid of cold and hunger, and also not afraid of arrows, swords and guns. As long as the Emblem was mounted, it would be able to rampage on the battlefield. In this way, what's the point for traditional knights to exist? At night, when Roland returned to his bedroom, he saw Nightingale again. She did not wear a hood this time, sitting at the table with a smile, holding a few pieces of parchment in her hands. "It seems the rumors are really untrue. It's said that Prince Roland is ignorant and unskilled, a vile character, but you're actually much better compared to the court master. Is it the design of the iron furnace on this piece of paper? You call it steam engine, right? Oh damn, can I get any privacy? You come and go as you wish. Do you think this is your home?" Suppressing his displeasure, he said blankly, "It's a design, but without Anna's help, it's just a sheet of paper." "What is it for?" "A lot. Transportation, drainage, smelting, forging. It's useful wherever massive power is needed." "In that case, I'll keep it." Nightingale rolled the parchment and put it in her robes. "There's also someone in the Witch Cooperation Association who can control the flames." "Hang on." She waved her hand to stop Roland's protest. "Of course, I'm not going to blatantly take your things. Take a look at this first." She placed a small lump of white thing on the table. Roland went over, picked it up with his fingers and found that it was a roll of paper. He gently spread it and had a quick look. "This is the letter sent by the pigeon," said Nightingale in a joking tone. "The recipient is your head-maid Tyre, and it seems that your harem is not safe." "I have never laid a hand on her," Roland said, frowning. Tyre seemed to have followed him for a long time in his memory. Originally, the prince was quite interested in her, but he failed in several harassments. After they came to Border Town, he directly promoted her to head maid, so that she could attend upon him. Her room was also arranged just next to his. He did not realize she was a spy sent by his siblings. Although the letter was not signed, judging by the content, it was very likely the handwriting of his siblings. The letter said the Lord was very unhappy about the failure in the last attempt. She was ordered to strike during the riot at Longsong Stronghold next time and not allowed to fail again. Well, actually she had succeeded, he thought, or I would not have become Roland Wimbledon. This letter was unlikely to be forged by Nightingale, because only those who participated in this conspiracy would know about the first assassination. Plus Nightingale did not need to take so much trouble to kill himself. "Did you steal this from her?" "Your headmaid was not so stupid. She was about to burn it, but luckily I happened to appear behind her back." Nightingale made a switching action. "So what are you going to do? Do you need my help to handle this?" Roland definitely knew what she meant by handle. He hesitated for a moment, and then finally nodded. "In that case, thank you for your kind help." He has no confidence in doing something like this. "If you can, please help me to find out who her mastermind was." "As you wish, Your Highness," said Nightingale with a smile. The design will be the pay. Chapter 24, The Development Plan. Waking up in the morning, Roland was not attended to by Tyre, but an old maid. Walking out of the bedroom, Chief Knight Carter was waiting outside for him. "Your Highness, I have to tell you a piece of unfortunate news," he said. "Your head maid was found dead last night." "What?" Roland's eyelids jumped. Although he already expected this result, his heart still felt uneasy. After all, she died because of him. She fell from the balcony of the room, and there were no traces of fighting. The guard did not see outsiders come in. So, she must have accidentally fallen. It was an accident. The knight reported the results of the investigation, while looking at Roland a little weirdly. Roland knew what he was thinking, of course. In the kingdom of Grey Castle, everyone knew that Prince Roland wanted to possess Tyre. In that era, the prince and the maids having relationships was very normal. There was hardly any entertainment, much less nightlife, so there was literally nothing else to do except fornication. Besides, the prince and the noble would also exchange women among themselves, and even organized orgies. So to say that the circle of noble was chaotic was more than a harmless joke. Prince Roland was already considered tame in this aspect, and after Cheng Yan woke up as Roland, he did not touch a single woman. Other than Tyre, the rest of the maids were considered quite shabby. Plus, after the time travel, he had to face the months of demons, so his brain was full of the farming project. He did not have the time to enjoy the decadence of noble life yet. "It's a pity," said Roland, with a feigned look of remorse. "About Tyre's funeral, ask the old maid who served me this morning to handle it. And she'll now be the new head maid." Carter nodded, bowed, and left. As soon as Roland entered the office, he saw Nightingale sitting on the mahogany table. "Did you manage to find out anything?" "Nothing. She committed suicide when she saw me," Nightingale said, with some frustration. "It was too fast. She didn't hesitate at all." "You didn't try to stop her?" Roland went round the other side of the desk and sat back on the chair. "I had tied her up," said Nightingale, leaning over, "but I didn't know she had poison in her teeth. So I had to set it up like an accidental fall. I thought you were very experienced, and you expect to be rewarded for this." Hey, don't put it like that. Although I didn't get any information from her, that does not mean I have nothing to report." Nightingale chuckled and put a folded paper in front of Roland. "Found in her room." Roland spread out the paper. It was a letter, from someone who called Tyre elder sister, and the content was just ordinary chit-chat. But he noticed that the writer mentioned the sea several times, such as how beautiful the seaside scenery was, and how she liked to stay on the beach to watch the sunset and the like. Finally, the writer asked Tyre when she would come back, as she deeply missed her. Recalling the domains of his siblings, Roland asked uncertainly, "Garcia of the Port of Clearwater?" "That's probably the case, as the sea can't be seen in the domains of your two brothers. I guess Princess Garcia Wimbledon must have taken Tyre's sister as a hostage, and used Tyre as a hidden pawn. From Tyre's decisive style of suicide, it's unlikely to be a coincidence. That means before she was arranged to be by your side, she had received at least 2 to 3 years of professional training." Roland sighed softly, and reiterated that the royal decree on the selection of crown prince would not end so easily. Even if he did not fight for the throne, it did not mean he could stay out of it. To get the throne, his brothers and sisters had no scruples, therefore it was likely something similar would happen again later. "Ah, somebody is here. I'd better make my move, Your Highness." Nightingale blew a flirtatious kiss through the air towards Roland, and disappeared with the blink of an eye. Even if this was not the first time he saw this, it was still shocking to see this in bright daylight. He hesitated, and stretched out his fingers towards the empty space now beside the table, but was stopped halfway by a soft hand. "Your Highness, you'd make Anna sad in this way." Well, it seems her ability was invisibility and not disappearance, Roland thought. That would have been too scary. There was a knock at the door. "Your Highness, I'm Barov." Roland took back his fingers and became expressionless. "Come in." With a large bundle of files in his arms, the assistant minister began to report nearly a week of government affairs right after he came in. Roland also cleared his thoughts and concentrated on his report. After more than a month of contact, he found himself familiar with Barev's working style rather than being completely confused and puzzled like in the beginning. In general, the finance of Border Town had a certain degree of improvement. This was mainly due to the ore and gemstones being sold to Willow Town in exchange for nearly 200 gold royals. After being used to purchase food and pay wages, there were still 90 royals remaining. Barev was also in a good mood. Now that there was some extra money, surviving this winter would not be too difficult. But Roland was determined to not let him be idle. I want to pick a group of people from the subjects to fight demonic beasts. And from now on they must be gathered to receive training. The instructor will be my chief knight, and I'll give him the specifics later on. You need to make a purchase plan, as these people must have solid leather armor and a gun, but also 2 sets of winter clothes. Your Highness, this, according to the convention, isn't this a temporary recruitment of subjects for war? Fighting on the battlefield without proper training makes them but a group of mobs. Can we scare off demonic beasts by relying on sheer masses? It's more troublesome if they break up. Don't tell me you really want to stand by Border Town? Barev hesitantly asked. If we really can't protect it, of course, I'll retreat. But I don't think we can't defeat even a few mutated beasts. If we go according to your plan, you'll need more money. Barev's miserly face made Roland laugh. These are necessary expenses, go take care of it. There were still more than 300 pieces of gold royals in his own vault, mainly used to pay for the cost of building the city wall. He also paid the blacksmith shop for the steam engine materials and components. The first machine cost him almost 20 gold royals, and he needed at least 3 more. The steam engine triggered the first industrial revolution, but it did not mean that the steam engine was equal to the industrial revolution. At that time, the United Kingdom urgently needed a new power to replace people and livestock in order to satisfy mine production. After what improved the steam engine, massive orders were immediately received from overseas, and the new power quickly spread to various industries. At this time, Border Town did not have the foundation for the Industrial Revolution, and industrialization did not even exist. So Roland did not expect to sell steam engines to make the first pot of gold. He just wanted to invest the machine in the Northern Slope mine area for mining and gravel. When the mine production increased, then he would expand the steam engine's scale of usage. This was the equivalent of promoting industrial development from top to bottom. Chapter 25, The Militia. These are the men you recruited? Roland asked. Looking at the crowd of folks in rags, he had to hold back the urge to turn about and get away immediately. Your Highness, these men were chosen according to your requirements, Carter replied, counting his fingers. Male, no criminal record, above 18, under 40 years old and not disabled. I have checked over everyone carefully. All right, Roland knew that he could not expect too much. After all, the productive forces of this world were so low that it would be difficult even to fill the people's stomach, not to mention to dress decently. His identity as a prince prevented him from seeing that refugees who had no clothes on their backs and begged for a living were a common sight out of the castle. As a matter of fact, even in the capital of Grey Castle, there existed the profession of corpse collecting. These people dragged away the corpses of the starving who dropped dead in the streets and burned them. So what's warfare like in this world? Roland closed his eyes and contemplated. It seems, it was only a little more elegant than gang fights. Generally speaking, when a lord decided to wage a war, or rather, had a fight, since Roland did not think what they were doing had anything in common with warfare, he would convene all the noble families in his domain, whom in turn convene the lower noble families in their respective domains. For example, a duke would convene his earls, while an earl would convene his viscounts, and a viscount his barons, and so on and so forth. These noble families usually had a bunch of knights and mercenaries as their own forces. These men were the main forces in a fight, and they were well armed and equipped. At the same time, they recruited common men and peasants in their domains to join the fight. To be honest, their purpose was to carry provisions for the troops and to fight in the front line. The ones who suffered most in battle were those groups of cannon fodder. As for the warriors from the noble families, as long as they did not die on a battlefield, they would be captured and then treated well so that they could be traded for ransom. Roland would not count on those few noble families in Border Town to fight for him. In fact, they had nothing to do with Border Town. Instead, their titles of baron were mostly granted by the Lord of Longsong Stronghold, and their territories also belonged to the domain of Longsong Stronghold. In this age, a platoon completely composed of common men required some imagination to understand. They were too ignorant to read documents or understand orders. Not to mention that they never had any professional training. How could they be compared with knights who started practicing sword fighting since the age of 10? Carter approached Roland and said softly, "Your Highness, this method has never been acceptable. Look at them. Which one of them can hold a sword? I'm afraid that they'd soon disperse at the sight of demonic beasts. This would instead disturb the line of defense and have a negative effect. I suggest that we should recruit professional mercenaries from Willow Town or other places to defend the city wall. These men could be kept for sundry duties." "No, I'll use them," Roland said, refusing Carter's suggestion. He did not like those mercenaries who fought for money. Besides, he was not only building this army to defend against demonic beasts. He knew from history that a powerful and dynamic army must be built from the people, and there were countless feudal, modern, and contemporary armies that had attested to this rule. "Okay, we'll do as you say," said the knight with a shrug. "Then should I train in swordplay? Though it may not be of much use." "Swordplay? No. You should instruct them to stand in formation and run." Roland held back his words after this, as it suddenly occurred to him that the chief knight himself might have never had such an experience. He said instead, "Call the hunter whom you approached last time. You both should pay attention to what I'll do." The unimaginable things Vanner experienced today were more than those of the past 20 years combined. He saw Prince Roland with his own eyes. The prince walked past him and even smiled to him. God, was the prince drunk? 3 days ago, when Prince Roland gave the lecture at the square, he knew that this winter would be different from before. They would not head for Longsong Stronghold, but would instead stay and pass the long winter in Border Town. Most of what the prince said was incomprehensible to him, but yet he agreed wholeheartedly with this decision. Vanner's brother died 2 years ago in Longsong Stronghold slum. For a whole month there had been no food supply of any kind. He shared the dark bread he bought with the few coppers he had earned unloading cargo at the pier with his brother. But that winter was too cold. Wind came in through every crack of the shack in which they lived, and what they ate could hardly keep them warm. His brother lost consciousness with an ailment and never woke up again. In Border Town, he at least had a house built by the earth, in which he did not have to fear a heavy snow that lasted long. He also saw wheat transported from elsewhere that piled up on the pier and then was transported to the castle in heaps. So Vanner came as soon as he heard that Prince Roland was recruiting for the militia. Of course, what had enticed him to give up his quarrying work for enlistment was the pay, which was as high as 10 silver royals per month. It was comparable to the pay of an experienced mason. He was no longer young and planned to marry Cheryl, the tavern waitress, the next spring, so it would be wise to start earning money. As for what the notice said about the militia's duties, he took no notice of it. It was either to carry things for their lordships, or to facilitate the patrol. After all, they couldn't possibly be ordered to fight the frenetic demonic beasts on the city wall. The selection was strict. The eyes of the knight in shiny armor made Vanner a little nervous. Fortunately, he passed the selection with his rather stout figure, though the knight eliminated many bony fellows through selection. At the end, there were only about 100 people left. But it had never occurred to Vanner that it was His Highness himself that trained them. Those who passed the selection were brought to a meadow west of Border Town. Behind them the city wall was being built, while in front of them stretched the endless misty forest. The prince commanded all to stand in formation and then rested aside. It had rained a few days ago and the ground was still mushy. Moisture penetrated his shoes from the waterlogged ground, making his whole body uneasy. Not to mention that the posture the prince demanded from them was quite unusual. They had to stand with hands down close to the sides of their thighs and keep their backs straight. It only took a quarter of an hour to make Vanner exhausted. It was more taxing than hammering stones during the quarrying. But he grinded his teeth and persisted, because His Highness had said the one who moved during the training would not have any egg at lunch. God knew how long it had been since he had last tasted an egg. It was obviously what others thought as well, for they all persisted with all their effort. It was not until the prince declared that everyone could rest on the spot that Vanner found himself soaked in sweat, despite the fact that he had only stood for half an hour. On the other hand, those who had not made it until the end regretted losing their egg. Yet Vanner could not think of the use of this training. Could they carry a few more packs of solid food, if they stood like this? If it was not for the fact that His Highness trained them himself, he would have cried out in doubt much earlier. But after the rest, the second order His Highness made was even stranger. He commanded that everyone should continue standing in formation. If no one moved this time, each one would have one more egg at lunch. However, this time if even one person gave up, everyone would lose their chance of adding one more egg to their meal. Vanner heard the sound of someone swallowing. Hell, was this the new joke of the nobles? With a carrot and a stick, the prince had led everyone on. But Vanner would never consider himself a dumb donkey. But what if everyone could do it? Then later on he could have 2 eggs for lunch. The appeal was too great. Drooling over the eggs, Vanner decided to try his best. Chapter 26, The Experience Learned from History. Your Highness, what's the meaning of this? Carter thought Prince Roland was arbitrary before, but now he thought the prince had become divorced from reality. With regard to how to train a soldier, the chief knight thought that no one would be more professional than himself. His family had a complete set of training method, where a boy of 10 years old could be trained as a soldier and would master all kinds of weapons in 5 years. If the soldier was further trained for 5 years, he would then be a top soldier, a knight who knew all rituals of upper class. Of course, the trainees could not come from a civilian family. Look at these idiots. They only think of eating eggs. Carter thought, besides. The eggs are so expensive. Roland responded casually, just watch them, and remember they must be trained in this way for the next few days. Of course, I'll make some changes, and I'll list down the details on paper. During the Cold War era, it was impossible to train a group of qualified soldiers in 2 or 3 months. And Roland had never thought of that, as he did not need that kind of Spartan warriors who were strong enough to tear a beast apart with bare arms. The individual soldiers did not have to be strong, but they had to be disciplined and execute every order without fail. The power of a unit was usually much stronger than individual strength. This was decided by social norm and acceptance. So he needed to form them into a unit quickly. The modern military training, with some modifications to suit the current situation, was a good choice. In his personal experience of military training, it took only half a month to integrate students from all over the country into a cohesive unit. The effect was very obvious regardless of the process. Only when this group of people completely understood the importance of discipline, could Roland implement the next step of his plan. Vanner still failed to get the second egg at the end. They had to stand twice as long as the previous round, and it did not end until someone's legs went weak and trembled. Just then, Prince Roland announced to have a rest and ordered the attendants to serve lunch. People's anger at the weakling was successfully transmuted into the eagerness toward food. Of course, Vanner began to suspect that His Highness probably had never intended to let them get a second reward. Lunch was packed in 4 large pots, which was transported by carriages to the outside of the town. In addition to food, they also brought a lot of wooden bowls and spoons. Vanner licked his lips, ready to rush to the carriages with the others, but was held back by the chief knight. His Royal Highness ordered all the people to line up in 4 rows and come forward one by one for bowls and spoons. Whoever dared to disturb the order would be forced to be the last one to get his food. The crowd hustled and squeezed, and lined up into 4 rows. Vanner was lucky enough to stand in the forefront of the outermost row. Of course, some people were not satisfied with their positions. The sound of quarrels and fighting was heard in the rows. Soon the knights and several guards rushed into the crowd and kicked the troublemakers out. Fool, thought Vanner when he glanced at the man who started the riot. That was Insane Fist, the most aggressive street fighter in the town. He used to stir up trouble everywhere with his brute force, but now he had to squat in the corner with swords pointed at him. Look how pitiful he was now. He felt that he had already figured out what His Royal Highness liked. He liked order. They had to stand upright in a straight line up to get food, and always follow orders. Vanner had heard from some knowledgeable businessmen that some of the noble had a strange habit: they could not tolerate disorder, and once something was out of place, they could not help rearranging things. In Vanner's mind, this kind of person was purely bored and had nothing better to do. So they would deliberately create some trouble to occupy their mind. He did not expect that His Royal Highness was such a person. When the lids of the pots were opened, Vanner smelled the strong flavor of food. When the flavor spread in the wind, he almost lost himself in it. The crowd also became restless, but soon the knight roared to keep them quiet. We probably have to line up again, Vanner thought. Sure enough, Prince Roland required them to line up for their portions of food just like before. Their mouths were watering and their stomachs were growling. But thinking of what happened to Insane Fist, they had to line up and wait patiently. The pots were filled with hot oatmeal. To Vanner's surprise, there was even dried meat in the porridge. Even if he only got one thin slice, but that was meat. In addition, he even got an extra egg like he wished for. Vanner gobbled down the porridge, even licking the bottom of the bowl once. He swallowed the entire egg without biting. Since he ate so fast and carelessly, his tongue blistered quickly. After putting down the pot, Vanner patted his belly and made a satisfied hiccup. He had not enjoyed such delicious food for a long time. And what was even more incredible was that he even felt a sense of satiety. Compared with brown bread, the sweet meat porridge tasted like heaven. He even thought, if he could eat such food every day, what would it matter if he had to fight against the demonic beasts in the front? After lunch, they had a long period of rest. They were brought back within the city wall, walking all the way to the camp of the battalion. A burly man of foreign nation came out and began to teach everyone how to set up tents. Vanner knew him. Nearly everyone in the town knew Iron Axe. With regards to his superb archery skill, he even far surpassed the most experienced old hunters in the town. Wait a moment, so now Iron Axe is serving Prince Roland? It seemed that I saw him by the side of the knights before. Vanner frowned and thought, what's His Highness planning? Iron Axe is a man of Sand Nation. Do you really intend to appoint a man of Sand Nation as captain? Carter had the same question. He doesn't belong to Kingdom of Grey Castle. And he isn't even from our continent. The witches don't belong to the Kingdom of Grey Castle either, Roland said, but they all belong to Border Town. Besides, aren't you watching them for me? But, Your Highness. Don't worry. Roland patted the knight's shoulder. The origin of a person doesn't matter in Border Town. As long as they don't violate the law of the kingdom, they're still my subjects. If you're really worried, you can choose 2 more excellent captains. Anyway, the team will continue to expand in the future, and you can cultivate some promising ones now. I have written down the training regulations. Compared to the people of Sand Nation, I think you'd better be more concerned about this. Carter took the parchment roll from Roland's hands. Skimming through the contents from beginning to end, he got a nasty shock. The training contents were almost unheard of. For example, they needed to run laps around Border Town in the afternoon from 2 p.m. till sunset. The regulations emphasized that everyone had to complete this, and they were allowed to help each other on the way. If they persevered and no one gave up, they would get an extra egg for dinner. Another example, when the whistles were blown at night, everyone had to get dressed and fall in as soon as possible. With these kinds of training exercises, Carter was afraid that most people would quit in a few days. The first few rules were already hard to understand, and the last one completely confused him. Every day after dinner, they're required to go to Mr. Carl's college for cultural training. Your Highness. What do you mean by cultural training? Do you want to teach them to read and write? I hope so, but the time is too limited. Carl could only teach them some simple words and numbers so that they can read and write orders. I'll personally explain this part to Carl. You just need to send them over. But, why do you want to do this? It's of no use in fighting against the demonic beasts. Who said so? Roland yawned. A unit good at fighting must also be well educated. That's the experience learned from history. Chapter 27, The Past. The weather was getting colder day by day, and Roland was waking up later and later. As the ruling class, he certainly had the right to sleep late. Especially with his large bed and 3 layers of velvet blankets, his whole body would fall into the soft encirclement when lying down. This made it much harder for him to get up early. After washing up, Roland stepped into his office and found Nightingale had been waiting there for a long time. Well, here's your breakfast. I ate half when it was hot, but now it's cold, she said, with her lips protruding. She nodded her head in the direction of the remaining bread on the table, as if she was the lord of the domain. Hasn't anyone taught you to be humble before the prince? Asked Roland, as he pushed away the plates and sat at the desk. I remember you were very polite at first. He sighed inwardly. He had not realized that she made friends instantly, and she would always be accompanying Anna or him. She had kept hidden at first, but now as long as there was no outsider present, she would stroll around his office and not even wearing a hood. Like this? She jumped off the table and bowed in the style and etiquette of a flawless noble. You've been getting up later and later recently. Since the breakfast remained unconsumed, I wanted to do you a favor by helping myself to some of it, Your Highness. She walked toward Roland and said, You don't care, do you? I can see that you don't like the tedious etiquette. Did she have a third eye? Roland wondered silently. She could see even this. He sighed. As you like, but you'd better finish the breakfast once you start it in the future. I'll order another portion if I want to eat it. Yes, Your Highness. She smiled and picked up the plate, moving quickly to one side. Roland rolled out a blank parchment. He was ready to complete the design drawing, left unfinished from yesterday. If he wanted to defend Border Town, he should not pursue a win with an almost equal loss in the first battle of winter. Since a corps that had not experienced war was not a qualified one, Roland feared that if there was any major loss, his soldiers who had only been trained for a short time would not have the courage to stand on the city wall. He needed epical weapons in order to have an absolute advantage over the demonic beasts. There was no doubt that he needed the flintlock. The arrow was equipped with all the conditions for the emergence of the flintlock. The alchemists often produced something they called snow powder for palace celebrations. It was essentially gunpowder but with the wrong formula and could burn slowly. When put into the copper tube, it mostly just made a small sound. In about 1 century, the prototype of the flintlock, the harquebus, would appear. The firearm had a complicated operation, which relied on the cooperation of 2 people doing the loading and shooting. In general, it could only be used as a single-shot weapon. As for its speed and power, it was no match for a trained archer. Roland, of course, was not interested in repeating history. It was better to make use of the witch's ability and create a flintlock with practical value, just like he had created the steam engine. I had looked at the order on the table before you came. Nightingale swallowed the last piece of bread and asked casually, What are you going to do with so many ices? It's winter now, and if you want to drink cold ale, why not directly put it outside for one night? The noble liked to use ice during summer, namely, the ice made of saltpeter. Then they could cool their milk, wine or juice for enjoyment. Thanks to winter's blessing, the current purchasing price for saltpeter was very low. To make iced cheese, the temperature is not low enough yet. It doesn't work well without freezing, Roland replied precariously. Although the woman in front of him was not his enemy, he did not know her as well as he knew Anna. Unlike the steam engine, there were not so many technical barriers to the flintlock. Once it became popular, it would obviously be unfavorable to his farming project. Until he learned more about her, it was better to keep some things from her. Thinking of this, he tentatively asked, "Does the Witch Cooperation Association help to train killers in addition to searching for Holy Mountain?" "No, they're only a group of poor people coming together for a dream," Nightingale waved and said, "and I joined the Witch Cooperation Association only 2 years ago." "In other words, you were working for someone else?" She could not have gained such perfect dagger-throwing skills without someone's guidance or years of hard work. Roland was pretty sure about it. "Other than me, is there anyone else willing to take in a witch?" "Take in?" Nightingale looked a bit strange. "How could it be? If he had known that I would become a witch, he wouldn't have even let me through his door. As for later on, if I had not proved my usefulness to him, I'd have been secretly killed." "Oh? Can you elaborate?" Nightingale shook her head with a smile, which contained slightly inexpressible moods this time. "Your Highness, I'll let you know when the time is right. I know what you're worried about. Please rest assured that I have been free for the last 5 years, and no longer work for others." Negotiations failed. It seemed that he was not charming enough. However, her answer indirectly confirmed his speculations. At least 5 years ago, she had secretly done something for someone. Fortunately, the person had only used Nightingale by chance, instead of recruiting large numbers of witches like he intended to. Roland did not ask more. He bowed his head and went on with the drawings. To his surprise, Nightingale, who had always liked being around him, became quiet, only leaving the sound of furnace fire burning in the room. When Roland lifted his head to stretch his limp, numb neck, she had left the office. "She didn't say goodbye," he muttered, folding the parchment and putting it into the inner pocket of his underclothes. He worked for a few days. He finished all the work, including the drawings, and the designs of the weapons, or the copies. He was planning to make the famous flintlock, which was time-tested and similar to the harquebus in terms of the technique level, with the ignition charge loaded into the rear and the lead ball loaded into the front. Its rate could be nearly 3 shots per minute. So more than sufficiently, it could be used to cope with the unintelligent mutant beasts. Most animals would not be able to climb the wall, so the shooting distance was approximately equal to the distance from the top of the city wall to the ground, approximately 4 meters. Within this distance, it was hard to miss the target and the initial speed of the bullet would hardly decrease. As long as the demonic beasts had not evolved with a skin harder than steel, they could basically be killed in one shot. The disadvantage of the flintlock was its long production time. At first, like the harquebus, it was made by craftsmen's repeated beats with a hammer. From the barrel to the trigger, it took about 3 months to make the whole gun. Among all the parts, the barrel was the most time-consuming. The craftsman had to beat the iron sheet into a thin and cylindrical shape, seal it with iron powder, and then engrave the rifling. Although there was no need for precise instruments, the craftsman must be skilled in order to make qualified barrels. This was why Roland had produced the steam engine first. With the steam engine available, he could directly drill a barrel into a solid iron bar with the steel drill. So, the production speed would be greatly improved, without any more reliance on the operation by the skilled craftsman. The only thing he needed would be a table on which he could fix the iron bar. Chapter 28, Fierce Scar. But when Roland operated it himself, he realized the actual situation was not as simple as he had expected. After slogging in the backyard for 4 or 5 days, the harder drill bits were completed successfully though. With the use of Anna's flame at a high temperature, he could easily get molten iron at over 1,500 Celsius degrees. Without any temperature constraint, he could quickly and easily produce small quantities of steel with the conventional wrought steel method. By stirring the molten iron with an iron bar, the excessive carbon and other impurities in the pig iron would oxidize in the air, and after repeating the operation several times, the premium steel appeared as the molten iron cooled down. The problem lay in the first steam engine. When this primitive machine was working, it created loud noise and high-frequency vibration. As a result, the drill could not stably finish drilling the entire solid iron. In rough labor, this degree of tremor did not matter, but this clearly would not work with the processing of the barrel. To improve this situation, he had to create a centrifugal governor to control the output power of the steam engine, and then use the gear assembly to reduce the vibration and adjust the bit rotation rate. Plus, the machining gears required a simple lathe. By the look of things, Roland found himself unable to achieve his goal before the arrival of the months of demons. Eventually, he could only apply the old method of asking the blacksmiths to gradually hammer it out. The plan to mass-produce flintlocks did not succeed. According to the number of blacksmith shops in Border Town, a maximum of 3 to 4 barrels could be produced monthly, which should be on the condition that the production of the second steam engine was stopped. The only consolation was that there was no need to worry about the pass rate of the barrel. The blacksmith just needed to beat the approximate shape of round tubes. Anna would do the pipe linking. The effect was close to the seamless tube cut out by the boring tool, and basically eliminated the risk of the gun barrel explosion. Roland had no choice but to revise his previous plan. He had intended to recruit hunters from Border Town to set up a flintlock squad. They were mostly proficient in archery, and both the bow and crossbow were their handy weapons. Plus, a firearm training was not time-consuming, so they could be ready for combat very soon. But from now up till the months of demons, only 4 flintlock guns could be made. In this way, only the most outstanding of the hunters could form an elite team. Roland decided to entrust this matter to Iron Axe to carry out. He had stayed in Border Town for 15 years, and was also generally recognized as the best hunter. Brian was unhappy this past half-month. Especially when he met the militia team in the street, his unhappiness doubled. He even could not reconcile himself to what had happened. He felt that he had been forgotten by His Highness. A month ago, when he was summoned by the chief knight, he was full of excitement. Being in close contact with Prince Roland and questioned by His Highness himself was a very fortunate and glorious matter. He was born in an ordinary hunting family and grew up in Border Town. By virtue of his own abilities, he became patrol leader. He knew he could not rely on his background to become a knight, but could only wait for the opportunity to make a merit and accept the conferral by the authorities. His Highness' inquiry made him sense the opportunity had come. Apparently Prince Roland did not want to give up his domain and was trying to find ways to fight the demonic beasts. Later on, the massive construction of the city wall proved without a doubt that this year they would be spending the months of demons in Border Town. If His Highness wanted to prevent the invasion of demonic beasts here, he had to set up a platoon brave enough for a face-to-face combat. Brian thought he himself was the best choice for the role, as he was proficient in investigation, swordsmanship, and equestrian skill. Every year, he would remain till the time for the garrison duty to ignite the beacon fire to prove his courage. But he never expected that His Highness would plan to choose a platoon from the populace to fight with the demonic beasts. Yes, it was a platoon of civilians. Furthermore, the whole patrol team of 10 people, including him, did not pass the review by the chief knight. This was simply incredible. Did His Highness felt that these civilians who had never held swords would be better than him in battle? It was more likely they would disperse once they saw the fiendish faces of the demonic beasts. But His Highness seemed to be serious. He was not only training this group of mobs but also gave them uniforms. Every afternoon, Brian could see this group of people wearing brown and gray leather armor, filed in 2 lines running on the streets. At the beginning, the platoon was messy, but recently it became much neater. But every day, he could only carry out boring tasks, without any hope of promotion. At night, while he was tossing and turning, there was a loud noise next door. The door was pushed open, and someone came in quietly. "Hey, get up! All of you," he whispered. Brian recognized his voice. He was a member of the patrol team and nicknamed Fierce Scar. There were 5 people in his room. Other than Greyhound and himself, the other 3 quickly got up, as if they had already been preparing for this as they slept with their coats on. "Captain, get up quickly. I have something important to tell you." Fierce Scar had a noble relative in Longsong Stronghold, who was said to be a great noble. Hence his position was very high in the team. Brian could not ignore him, so he got up and asked, "What happened?" Greyhound was also awakened. It's so late, don't you guys go to bed? I have a good job for you. Do you want to be conferred as a knight? What? Knight? Greyhound exclaimed. Brian's heart skipped a beat and quickly asked, "What's the job exactly?" "You all know my uncle Hurt. He's the earl conferred by the Duke and also the Duke's confidant. He personally told me this." Fierce Scar lowered his voice. "Prince Roland is ready to cast off Longsong stronghold, and this has displeased the Duke greatly. The Duke has decided to let the prince know that only he is the master of the western region." Don't tell me, you intend to assassinate." Greyhound stuttered once he got nervous, and could not complete his sentences. "How could it be?" Fierce Scar said, tittering. "He is a prince after all. If he's dead, even the Duke cannot protect us. As I said, it's a good job." Brian subconsciously felt that the deal was not as simple as he claimed. But the temptation of being a knight was so great that he could not help but reply, "Tell me more." "Grain. If there's no food, he'll have no choice but come back to Longsong stronghold. The Duke promised that as long as we can successfully burn the grain bought by Prince Roland, he'll make us knights. And even give us a piece of land in the eastern Longsong stronghold. It's a golden opportunity. Captain, what do you think of it?" You're crazy. His Highness has already said, this year, the months of demons is likely to last for more than 4 months. If you burn the grain, what will we eat?" Greyhound shook his head repeatedly. "Have we all forgotten what happened 2 years ago? What does that have to do with us?" The other man remarked with disdain. "Anyway, I didn't intend to stay here. After finishing Duke Ryan's task, I'll be able to live a good life in Longsong stronghold." "That's right. Do you want to stay in this dump and eat furnace slag forever?" The others echoed the view. Damn, they were in cahoots. Brian's heart sank. Only Greyhound and him grew up in Border Town, the rest came from all parts of the country and did not have any special feelings towards the town. Sensing it pointless to stop them, he changed the subject. "But the wheat has already been transferred to His Highness Castle. With the entrance guarded by personal knights, how could you enter it?" "That's why I've asked you to join." Fierce Scar laughed confidently. "You've stayed in this dump since you were young, so no one knows this environment better than you. I remember you once said the well at the back mountain was connected to the waterway at the bottom of the castle. Through it, you can quietly access the castle garden. You even crawled through it when you were a child. So if you join me, you can become a knight in the future, and even personally conferred by the Duke." "No. Knights should be courageous and fight unfairness. They should not be afraid of powers of coercion, but should protect the weak. Just for the sake of the Duke's personal grudges, why should we expose the town residents to the threat of hunger and death? Such a knight is just an empty shell, without any glory at all." As he was about to refuse, Greyhound shouted, "Ah, a group of madmen. You actually dare to mess with the grain. I'll never let you leave here. I want to report to." Greyhound was in mid-speech when the sound solidified. He turned around in disbelief, as a former teammate stood behind him, sneering. A black dagger thrust into his back and entered the body completely. He trembled twice, opened his mouth trying to say something, but could only utter a hoarse breathing sound. The attacker swiftly moved the dagger twice, and then violently pulled it back. Greyhound suddenly lost the support like a lifeless doll, and collapsed softly to the ground. And so? Fierce Scar came close to Brian, who could even feel the stench of his mouth. "I think you have decided." "Right, Captain."